and let us pray. And this morning, I'm using the same collect we used this past Sunday in Pentecost. It's from the New Zealand prayer book for the Feast of Pentecost. And I just love this language about transforming God. So let us pray. Transforming God, you brought the church to birth through the gift of the Holy Spirit. Empower us by that same Spirit. Grant the courage of the first disciples to proclaim your life-giving love to all. Through Jesus Christ, our liberator, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Here comes Anna Maria. And I can't remember if Marietta is going to be with us this week. I think she was having her accountant come today or something important like that. Hey, Anna Maria.
Hello, how
How
are
are
you?
you? I'm glad to
Doing
see you.
fine.
Thank you.
Getting ready for my last day,
When is your last day?
June 30th.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
so
excited.
happy for you. That is
Yeah,
wonderful news.
thank you. Thank
Oh, and thank you for your nice note. That meant a lot to me.
you. Yeah.
Oh, right. Here we go. So let me find, sorry, let me find where we are. And we are beginning Job chapter 10. I'm wondering, since it's been 2 weeks, did anyone want to revisit anything from our last session on Job 9? Um, we were thinking about, can anybody be just before God? Is anybody able to
Mm.
be righteous in God's sight? And was there anything left over that anyone wanted to revisit?
It just seems to me that God himself had said Job was just.
But he was giving Satan the opportunities. That's the problem. That is the problem.
Well, I mean, this whole thing is just very troubling to me in terms of, how God is portrayed.
Well, and remember, and we always have to remember this, that it's the human perception of God based on one's circumstances, right? This isn't an objective account. So, you know, it calls into question. I mean, I think it brings up for us a lot of questions about theodicy, about the justice, the righteousness of God, and our stance in relationship to God. So, that's why I'm enjoying, personally, why I'm enjoying this Bible study of Job so much, because it opens up so many questions for us. Um, you know, I don't believe in biblical inerrancy, so I don't necessarily take this literally. But I do think that it provides a wonderful jumping off point for our own exploration of how we understand God and what righteousness and justice is.
Patty, what did you say? You said you don't take what
Oh,
literal.
I don't I don't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. So
Okay.
that it's, it inspired by God, by written by humans. And so
Right.
that's why it's so troubling when people, are more fundamentalist
Mhm.
sisters and brothers take it much more literally. And it's just hard for me personally, because the Bible contradicts itself in so many places. And so
Yeah.
where are we left? Um, but so I think it's worth us holding up Fred's point about, it's a troubling portrayal. And so we are left to figure out what we believe and what we think in light of that. Um, okay. Well, then why don't we continue with chapter 10? And as we've been doing, I think it's helpful if we have one voice read the whole monologue.
No, you said
Um,
it.
And there she is. Hey, Jackie.
She's all fluff now.
I see that. How are you, my dear?
For Anna Marie.
Oh, dear. So would somebody like to read chapter 10 all of a piece, and I'll scroll for you and you can let me.
Sure.
Was that you, Fred? Thank you.
Yeah. And I read my version.
Okay. Remind
I
me
like I like the type better.
what translation
The
you.
New International.
Great. And again, it, especially with Job, because the Hebrew is really complicated, it's wonderful when we have different translations. So if as you're following along, if a word in your own translation pops up for you that's different from what Fred reads or what I have on the screen, let's look at it, because that's the really interesting bit. How did each translator interpret the Hebrew? Okay, I'll be quiet now.
I loathe my very life. Therefore, I will give free rein to my complaint and speak out in the bitterness of my soul. I say to God, do not declare me guilty, but tell me what charges you have against me. Does it please you to oppress me, to spurn the work of your hands while you smile on the plans of the wicked? Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as a mortal sees? Are your days like those of a mortal, or your years like those of a strong man, that you must search out my faults and probe after my sin? Though you know that I am not guilty and that no one can rescue me from your hand. Your hand shaped me and made me. Will you turn now and destroy me? Remember that you molded me like clay. Will you now turn me to dust again? Do not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese. Clothe me with skin and flesh, knit me together with bones and sinews. You gave me life and showed me kindness, and in your providence watched over my spirit. But this is what you concealed in your heart, and I know that this was in your mind. If I sinned, you would be watching me and would not let my offense go unpunished. If I am guilty, woe to me. Even if I am innocent, I cannot lift my head, for I am full of shame and drowned in my affliction. If I hold my head high, you stalk me like a lion, and again display your awesome power against me. You bring new witnesses against me and increase your anger towards me. Your forces come against me wave upon wave. Why then did you bring me out of the womb? I wish that I had died before any eye saw me. If only I had never come into being or had been carried straight from womb to the grave. Are not my few days almost over? Turn away from me so that I can have a moment's joy before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and utter darkness, to the land of deepest night, of utter darkness and disorder, where even the light is like darkness.
Thank you.
Hmm.
So maybe what I'll ask first is, did anybody, if you're following along at home, and I realize not everyone is looking at, a lot of people are looking at the screen, but if you have your own text at home, were there any words that Fred read that might be different from yours, or that you noticed were different from what's on the screen and that interested you? There was something, and I was so caught up that there was something you read, Fred, that your translation rendered differently than the NRSV, and I'm just wondering where it was.
One thing was about holding your head like a lion.
Yes, here we go. Yes. Fred, could you read 16 and 17 in your translation again?
Sure. If I hold my head high, you stalk me like a lion, and again display your awesome power against me. You bring new witnesses against me and increase your anger towards me. Your forces come against me wave upon wave.
Thank you. Yeah. So this translation has you repeat your exploits against me. So that's kind of damning to say about God. What if,
Well, what he's saying is he can't win.
well, right. But
Yeah.
Like the previous chapter, he's, even if I'm innocent, there's nothing I can do about it.
well, right. But my point is that word exploits, the word in Hebrew, oh, sorry, hate all these pop-ups. The word in Hebrew is more benign, I think. power, to be marvelous, wonderful, surpassing. It's a positive. But the way that the NRSV translates it as exploits, that has a exploits aren't usually positive. So that's why I
Mm.
lifted that up. Um, what else strikes you all?
Well, what strikes me is that he asked God to let him alone,
Yeah.
that he could find some comfort. And he seems to entirely forget that it was only by God's largesse that he was, living, whoever it was who said, like the Elon Musk of wherever he was, and that he had all these good things. Like, did he think he made them up? I mean, this doesn't make sense to me a little bit.
I'm
It,
so glad you said that, Donna. Go ahead, Fred.
no, I mean, there is no chance in this world, in this cosmology. God is controlling every bit of it. And, he's controlling it with an eye towards what I see as the prosperity gospel.
Again,
The,
remember that that's the perception of those who are, of the author or whoever recorded the story of Job. So, yeah, absolutely.
so he is, God is responsible for everything. And it occurs to me that, from Job's perspective, Job hasn't, had one bit of sympathy for the fact that his sons got snuffed out on, because of his perceived sins.
Mm-hmm.
It's all woe is me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure if I thought I was responsible for my kids dying, I would, be throwing dust in the air too. But I would also be, I would show some sympathy towards them.
And perhaps some contrition.
Well, I try, the deal that I would be trying to make with God might be a bit different from his deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the line that really jumped out at
14.
me, it was
14 worries me.
okay, go ahead, Elin, then I'll talk, then I'll finish.
If you
what I was
do not, if I sin, you watch me and do not acquit me of my iniquity.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that fit with our understanding of God, I wonder?
No.
Mm.
Certainly doesn't fit with mine.
No.
Yeah, this idea of God, sort of peeking around corners and just waiting for Job to screw up.
Mm.
I think there are a lot of people who understand God that way. And that breaks my heart because,
Mm.
again, I know God through Jesus, and that's not how Jesus reveals God at all. So it's striking. I'm so glad you raised that verse, Elin, because that worried me too. And the one that struck me was the one right before it, verse 13. Well, I'll back up a little bit. I'll go back to 10. Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? For some reason, I love that image. You clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinews, and that reminds me of the psalmist who talks about, being knit together. And Jeremiah talks about, being knit together in his mother's womb. You have granted me life and steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. Yet, these things you hid in your heart. I know that this was your purpose. And it's that I know that jumps out at me. Like, really? Job, you know the mind of God? Okay. It strikes me as really arrogant.
It
But we
wasn't that arrogant back then.
but again, we can only look at it from our perspective. And so what I'm saying is that we all do that, right? We all claim that we know God's intention or purpose or desire. And just hearing it in this language in Job's rant, it leaps out at me as, wow, that's pretty presumptuous. And I'm not saying that we don't do the same thing. It's just, it's a stark relief to hear him say it.
The
Mhm.
Yale course made the point that, the early Hebrews, as a small, very, tribe of very little temporal power,
Mm-hmm.
needed a big kick-ass God
Yeah, of
to
course.
protect them. And, you're my favorites. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to, the covenants God made with the Hebrews were generally modeled after the covenants that that a strong king might make with a subservient neighbor.
Yep, definitely.
And, God, he needed to be powerful and, not really, well, he needed to be the one who controlled everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he put down rules and you obeyed him or else. If you mocked God's prophet, even if you were a little kid, she-bears came and tore you apart. If if 50 people came out to summon you to the king, they were all incinerated twice.
Mm.
If you put out your arm to steady the Ark of the Covenant, trying only to keep it from spilling, and you weren't of the priestly class, you were struck dead.
Mm-hmm.
This was a God that didn't take prisoners.
Mm-hmm. Again, according to
That's-
the perception of the people of Israel.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you need a big kick-ass God. And think about the covenant with Abram. We used that passage from Genesis yesterday for noonday prayer with the staff, and it really struck me because in Genesis God says to Abram, this land I will give to you, meaning Canaan. Well, hello, there are people living in Canaan already. And so really, God's just going to, smite them. And so, again, it's the people of Israel needing to understand God as having chosen them and blessed them and generations after them. So, in that sense, there's some consistency. Yep.
And if we are seeing God, as a more universal God, that the Israelites were taking what they needed out of it, which made them feel special, then are we then willing to accept the fact that God has spoken to other people through the ages?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One other difference I noted here in what Fred read and what's on the screen, and sort of goes back to the earlier development of the chapters, that Job was lamenting, but he wasn't really cursing God or speaking directly to God. While here at the start of and he says, "Hey, I'm going to give utterance. I'm going to speak my bitterness." Said, "I."
Breaking up.
Oh, we're losing you, John.
Why did I mishear that?
Could you say that again? You broke up a little bit. Your mic
I'm
was
sorry. It was
okay.
at the start where it says, I'm going to speak the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God." I think Fred's version was, "I tell God," or "I say to God." It was a more affirmative, direct complaint.
Mhm.
Maybe I misheard Fred.
What did you have at verse 2, Fred?
Excuse me, I was on the phone just a minute. What are we doing about verse 2?
Could you read
Read.
your version of verse 2 again?
Oh, I say to God, do not declare me guilty, but tell me what charges you have against me.
Mhm.
Okay. So, yeah. So, John was pointing out that in the NRSV translation, it's "I will say to God." So, it's not as direct. And your translation makes it, a direct conversation and a direct
what I had.
confrontation.
What gets me is this is so inconsistent. What happened to the guy who said, "The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord"? He's gone.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
got boils.
I guess
I mean,
maybe that did it.
he said that after his children were killed, but then he got boils, and there was somewhat more pain, I guess.
Enough is enough.
It is
Mm.
sort of a progressive descent. We're only 10 chapters in, and you can see, this, oh, how the mighty have fallen, right? It's almost tragic watching him gradually shift his attitude. Um, so yeah, great point, Donna. What happened to him? And that wasn't so long ago. Um, it's interesting to me too that here Job says, whether he's saying it directly or saying that he will say it, imagining saying it to God. Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as humans see? Are your days like the days of mortals, or your years like human years? Well, what's the implicit answer to that?
Oh, no.
No, yeah, absolutely not. Um, so it's really interesting to me that Job is using this comparison with the human perspective and the limitations um, of humanity.
But if we are to deal with even the concept of God in any way, shape, or form, we have to have some concept to deal with.
Hmm.
The early Israelites, God was on the other side of an unbridgeable gulf.
Right.
And you couldn't know him, you couldn't understand him. All you could do was, be in fear and awe and trembling and hope you didn't make him mad.
Well, and as I have said before, so often people will say, well, the God of the Old Testament is so different from the God of the New Testament. And
Mm.
what I always argue, and what makes sense to me, is that it's the same God, but we understand God differently through Jesus. So, if we're extrapolating from the experience of the early Israelites, and, as you were saying, Fred, about needing a kick-ass God, here comes Ellie, um, then that makes perfect sense. And so, uh, it's really interesting what a stark comparison that is with how we understand God as we've come to know God through Jesus. Um, hey,
But
Ellie,
Hi, sorry I'm late.
that's quite all right. How's the planning going?
Very nice gentleman in the, excuse me, I'm turning my volume up. There you are. From the local Presbyterian church.
Local to Nags Head or local to here?
Local to Clinton, New York, which is where Hamilton College.
That's right. I forgot she's going to be buried at Hamilton. That's right.
Yeah. Her family was very closely involved with Hamilton from the, practically inception, and Dad was a trustee, and Jeff and I both went there, and it's great. Got married in the same chapel where we're having the memorial, and she was married in that chapel too. So it's
lovely.
So I'm open to suggestions for a second hymn.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to make some if you'd like. I'm happy to stay on afterwards, and I'm happy to throw some out there.
That'd be great.
When is the service?
Next Saturday.
So
Not this
this
coming
Saturday.
Saturday, but the one after.
Well, lovely.
Still got have a little time.
Good. Well, as I said in my email back to you, I'm in the throes of doing the same thing, so maybe we can inspire each other. Anyway,
Sorry.
Hmm?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. We're just so glad to see you. So we are deep in chapter 10 here, and Donna was just making the point that, as we move through and move into the book of Job, it seems as though, where's the Job early on who, Donna, you said it so beautifully. Could you say it again? I don't want to misparaphrase you.
The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. So where is that Job as we hear, here in this translation, Job talks about God's exploits, and Job says, I know that you're watching me around every corner, and as soon as I sin, you don't acquit me of my iniquity. And so we were just talking about how, gradually he's shifted. His tune has changed a little bit. And we talked about why that might be. What else strikes you all? Are there words here that you'd like to look at in the Hebrew, or ideas that you want to noodle around a little bit?
It appears to me that Job has become more human.
Makes sense.
He was, at the beginning of the book, and the way in the first chapters, that prose, almost, it's setting the stage, and the narrator, um, really sets Job up as almost a superhuman, right? Who is blameless in God's sight and righteous and never does anything wrong. Well, hello, who among us is like that? He's not. At the beginning, he doesn't really even read as a real person for that reason. And to your point, Elin, his humanity is coming out, which I have to say I appreciate, because that's where we all are, right? None of us is the superhuman figure, caricature.
Well, I think he had to be, or otherwise there's no point in, he would have no refuge.
Can you say more about that? I'm not sure.
He has to be perfect in the beginning and not sin, because otherwise all these things could be, God would be perfectly justified in punishing him for his sin, according to the theology of the time.
Right. Oh, of course. But, from a literary point of view, it's just good to track that and how his character has shifted. And, he's much more relatable as a human. We may criticize him, but he's also more like us as we see him wrestling with the suffering he's encountering.
I wanted to explore a little bit, when you say we know God through Jesus, he's the same God. I mean, the early Israelites knew him through his direct works, or at least what they perceived were his direct works.
Right, exactly. And so
he didn't seem to object to that. That opens up an uncomfortable can of worms for me. And if if you're going to say, you see God through this perception, or you see him through that perception, if God doesn't change, if God is unchanging, but our perception of him changes because he tells us different things.
Well,
we're getting close to what Freud, I believe said, that we made God in our image rather than vice versa.
Not at all what I'm saying, Fred. If we believe that Jesus is God incarnate, and Jesus reveals to us, Jesus says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Jesus is a corrective to the ways in which God has been misunderstood and misinterpreted. And so, that's not making God in our image. That's listening. If we believe that Jesus is God incarnate, and I realize that is the fulcrum, right? That it hangs on whether one believes that Jesus is in fact God, the incarnation of God. And if not, then it's a different question.
Indeed, Fred said that God didn't object. God did object, and he sent Jesus to correct it.
Well, I mean, that was 3,000 years or whatever of God speaking to people directly in their perception.
Well, speaking directly, but then they writing down their perception and misperceiving, quite frankly.
Wow. We wrote down what we thought was Jesus. How can we be sure we haven't misperceived his?
Because we can count on Paul.
Some of us. You must have been hell in court, John.
You go, John. Well, I wanted to go back to, when we last time, 2 weeks ago, when we were reading chapter 9, we talked about how the text kind of describes the undoing of creation, right? And the return to chaos and the return to the way things were, the way it's described in Genesis, the mythic story of the beginning of the world, right? And that story we know, in the beginning, God hovered over the waters, and out of chaos came order. And so in chapter 9, we saw how that, Job was kind of describing the return to that chaos. And here we have it again here. Your hands fashioned and made me. Again, sort of an allusion to God creating first man, Adam, and breathing life, right? Um, and and now you turn and destroy me. You fashioned me like clay. Will you turn me to dust again? So it's this undoing of creation from Job's point of view. And then there's oh, yeah, at the very end. Um, Let me alone that I may find a little comfort before I go, never to return to the land of gloom and deep darkness, the land of gloom and chaos, where light is like darkness. And so, from Job's perspective, all the goodness of creation is sort of unraveling, right? Anything else in chapter 10 that bothers you, intrigues you, makes you wonder?
I'm wondering if some of 9 and 10 is a reaction to 8. In other words, the evils of peer pressure from Bildad the Shuhite.
Mm-hmm.
Is this tirade somewhat because Bildad had his say and sort of implied it was Job's fault, and that kind of makes Job kind of react this way?
That's a really good, excuse me. It's a really great observation too. And as I'm thinking about it, we're reading it on the page or on the screen, and we're kind of plodding through chapter by chapter. But this is meant to be a dialogue, right? A monologue, and then a refutation or rebuttal by, one of the friends, quote unquote friends. And, if we were to see this enacted on stage, like if there were a dramatic reading of this, you would be able to see Job responding to the others. And, you could see their words kind of starting to get to him. And it's harder to do that when the way we're doing it. So that's a wonderful point, Donna, which I hadn't really thought so much about. But you're right, there's a reason we hear these other voices in here. And of course they're going to, start infiltrating Job's consciousness. I've got to go back and look at the Hebrew for verse 10, the curdle like cheese.
I don't like that translation.
Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese?
That would give him a solid shape. That's the way I interpreted it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Uh-huh.
You pour it out like milk, and then you turn it into something that lasts longer and is.
You created me. You created me in a form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. This is one of those places we said before that just as when we read the letter of James and there was a lot of Greek that only appeared in James, so too in Job, there's a lot of Hebrew that's only in Job. This is one of those cases with the cheese and the curd. Yeah, and just let me see about curdle. Curdle.
I'll tell you that.
Well, curdling is a thing that, I mean, it just doesn't. It's caused
It's intentional.
Condense.
It's, yeah, it's caused, and it's caused by an element that you add. You add the rennet to the milk, and that's what makes it congeal and thicken, and the proteins collect, and turning into something that can be formed and used.
Yeah, so this is not like curdled milk,
Mm-hmm.
spoiled milk. It would be like, a creation
Liquid.
process.
Mm.
But there's some change involved in that. And that's what I kept coming back to. Curdle mean like cheese. It's like, okay, something is happening to him.
It's
So
just another way of talking about the forming process.
yeah, but to Ellie's point, there's almost like this alchemy is not the right word, but there is some change that happens in the curdling. So it's just an interesting image, I think. That it's not like the clockmaker god. This is how I'm hearing. It's not like the clockmaker god who creates and then leaves alone. The curdling, something had to have, there had to have been some action there, subsequent action. That's all I'm suggesting.
I don't think this is the clockmaker god concept, sort of took off with Newton
Well, right. I'm not saying clockmaker.
before. Yeah. I mean,
I'm
the
talking-
idea that God created it, stood back before. I mean, this is a God who lifts up the sun every day and puts it away at night and
Mhm,
is watching every move you make.
mhm.
He's also kind of a gotcha God.
Well, again, that's the disturbing thing for some of us to hear Job say, basically you've been watching me, my every action, you're stalking me, and every time I screw up, you say,
Or just waiting for me to screw up.
Yep, exactly.
So you could, and I mean, there are a lot of, that's not an unusual attitude in Christianity, that you're being good because you want to get into heaven.
Right. And as I said earlier, I find that problematic because, and I agree that for many people do see God that way. And I'm saying that that's not how I understand God. So, yeah.
Well, that's why we like you. If you ever get up and start preaching hellfire and brimstone,
You're not going to ever hear that from me. I can promise you that. You're never going to hear that from me. All right. Anything else? Should we go on to Zofar in chapter 11, the third of the friends? Why don't we do that? Let's see. Let's see how we're doing. Oh, good. We got time, I think. All right. Would somebody like to read the words of Zofar, the Namaphite? I can never say that word. So this is another one of Job's friends, interlocutors, debate partners. Would someone like to read 1 through 20 for us?
Shall I read?
Thank you, Elin.
Should a multitude of words go unanswered, and should one full of talk be vindicated? Should you babble, put others to silence, and when you mock, shall no one shame you? For you say, my conduct is pure, and I am clean in God's sight. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For wisdom is many-sided. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves.
Ooh.
Can you find out the deep things of God? You find out the limit of the Almighty. It is higher than heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol. What can you know? Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. If he passes through and imprisons and assembles for judgment, who can hinder him? For he knows those who are worthless. When he sees iniquity, will he not consider it? But the stupid will get understanding when a wild ass is born human. Sorry, that's what it says.
I got it.
Friends
Yeah.
like that.
If you direct your heart rightly, you will stretch out your hands toward him. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and do not let wickedness reside in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear. You will forget your misery. You will remember it as waters that have passed away. Your life will be brighter than noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning. You will have confidence because there is hope. You will be protected and take your rest in safety. You will lie down and no one will make you afraid. Many will entreat your favor. But the eyes of the wicked will fail. All way of escape will be lost to them, and their hope is to breathe their last.
Thank you, Ewan. Okay, what do you make of Zofar?
He's no damn help at all.
Yeah.
With friends like these.
There's a reason Job's comforters have become a cliche.
Oh, golly. All right, so what do you hear Zofar saying here?
These two people are talking, they're talking through each other.
Mhm.
They're not really talking at each other. Job is saying, I'm blameless. I have tried my best. If God may have something, but I can't know it. And really, he is agreeing with him. God is smarter. Zofar is saying, God knows things that you can't know.
Mhm.
And, there isn't any reason to protest his judgment because,
That's right.
you
made
can't
that
know anymore.
mistake.
Yeah, if you're born an ass, you can't know, you can't possibly understand how you've screwed up.
Mhm.
But then he goes on and says that, accept it. You screwed up. You're getting what you deserve. Probably not even everything you should deserve. You probably should get more. But reach your hand out to God. Sit back. Put your hands in His hand. Let Him take you, and you will be okay.
But he obviously isn't okay.
Well,
Well,
he
let's-
hasn't
right now,
followed his
let's-
advice yet.
yeah.
He's protesting God.
He
He's fighting it.
he followed his advice right up until the moment when it didn't work.
Well, for now, let's focus on Zofar's point of view. And so, so thinking about if we were to stage this, and you've got all the friends, right? And there's Job. Um, I hear what you're saying, Fred, about they're kind of talking through or past each other. One thing strikes me though is, in chapter 10, Job does say, I know this was your purpose. That was that line that really got my goat. And then, Zophar sort of calls that into question. Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? He's kind of saying, you Donna, were you about to say something?
No.
Okay. So what do you think? Ellie has rendered or has declared Zophar to be useless. You want to say more about him, Ellie?
Well, it's not helpful because he's telling Job that you, Job, have no idea what you've done wrong. You will never have God's vision of just how despicable you are. Therefore, just trust that punishment is suitable because it comes from God, and God understands better than you do how much punishment you deserve. But you're and don't fight it, because by definition you are stupid and human, and just trust that God is doing the right thing toward you. What I don't really follow is if you direct your heart rightly, if iniquity is in your hand, well, if he doesn't know that he's being iniquitous, then how can he put it away? And then Zophar is saying everything will be hunky-dory. And but that creates a problem for Job because somebody's got to say this.
Catch 22.
Yeah. Recognize that you're really evil. But
except I guess the thing is, though, Zofar doesn't have the background that we have. He doesn't know that God and Satan were working all this out. And, you know, he's got Job here who's been afflicted. And in his view, that's God's judgment. And he must have done something wrong. And he's giving him advice, you know, go forward, put aside whatever it was you did before, but, you know, reach out to God and he will accept you and restore you.
That's a great point, John. You know,
Well done.
it's that
Good
dramatic
point.
irony, right? Where the audience knows things that the characters don't. And that's a wonderful point because we have the benefit of that prose section, you know, that introduction, you know, that dialogue between God and Satan and all of that at the beginning. Really good point. And, you know, these guys don't have that insight.
I still think that he's illogical because how is you know, he says that if you give up all this iniquity and everything will be wonderful, life will be brighter than noonday. Since Job has no idea because he's stupid what the iniquity is, then he's, as Fred says, it's catch-22. You have no recourse here. Because
but Zofar may be thinking that he is denying his iniquity. You know, Job says, I don't know what it is, but Zofar is not Job. And he says, oh, you ought to really think hard about, you know, about that before you proclaim your innocence.
What you've done to deserve this, yeah.
There's in the prayer book in Rite 1, there's that wonderful line, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. And that strikes me here, that, you know, maybe Zofar is saying, you know, take it to John's point, you know, take a look at your heart again. And, you know, maybe you don't know what you've done, but is it possible that you've done something? And again, to bring it to us, because I think that's really the point of doing Bible study, is to engage it at our own level as well as intellectually, you know, at our heart and soul level. You know, how often do we say, well, I haven't done anything wrong, I'm not sinful, well, you know, it's a great, I think it's a great question to ask ourselves. And so Zophar is proposing that, you know, take a look at your heart, put your iniquity far away, turn around, and do not let wickedness reside in your tents. I just want to look at verse 14 in the Hebrew because I have a theory about it. Let's see what Hebrew says. Put it far away. No, I was not right. Okay. Descend away, be far, be distant. It's almost like exile your iniquity from you. Send it into exile kind of thing. All right. Do not let wickedness reside in your tents.
I was just wanted to comment that verse 14, it almost sounds to me as though Zophar is making Job responsible for all the behavior of everybody on his property. When he says, don't let the wickedness reside in your tents, you don't know what was going on. You weren't checking well enough, and, you know, it was your watch and you may have screwed up.
Your dwelling, your home, your habitation. That's a great point.
I mean, I see this as really coming down to the question, is man fundamentally sinful? Is there original sin? Is there nothing you can do to get away from it? Or, you know,
Well, what's
or
your
not?
answer to that?
I think Zophar's answer is yes. You can look at it, process it, put it aside, recommit yourself, amend your ways, and trust in God, and everything will be great.
But if you don't know your sin, you're just sort of reduced to being this abject, apologetic, person.
If I've done something wrong. Yeah.
I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I hate to say it, but that's, how people
Well,
get gaslighted and abused.
Hmm.
But again, I think he may be asking Job to re-examine, process, and see if there's something there that needs to be amended and needs to be changed. And I'm not as hard on Zofar. I mean, I think he is, in his perception, is trying to help.
I think he's trying to help, but I don't think he knows how. And he's, as I say, he's talking past Job.
Would
They're
we
not.
have to help?
What's that, Ethan? I missed the
Would
first
we
part.
know how to help?
Great question.
Hmm.
Great question.
Mm.
Well, Fred, do you think that humankind is fundamentally sinful?
You would have to define sin in that.
well,
And
you
I
were-
have a problem with that. Mankind is fundamentally, and it's goes back to, you start off not having a sense of self. You have to develop that sense of self to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And to continue to grow, you have to be willing to set aside a certain amount of what's in it for me to recognize the benefit, and the good you can do for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So sin, to me, I'm not sure where sin fits in that, cosmology,
Well, I
in
bring
that
it.
framework.
I asked the question because you were the one who said it. So.
Yeah. I know, and it brings up the question, if Job is born sinful and there's nothing he can do about it, then God, sort of gets the free pass to punish him however he feels necessary. I
But
think
according to Zofar, we're all born sinful,
Yeah.
but we need to focus in on our sin and do better and do,
And there is that
do what God
there is
wants
that
us
view
to do.
we're all inherently sinful, and it's just only only through God's mercy that we're not all burning in eternal hellfire. You hang by a thread over the hellfire, as a Cotton Mather preached or whatever, that really resonated with people. You cannot be good, you cannot be worthwhile. It's only through grace that you can escape damnation.
Mm.
That resonates. That doesn't fully resonate with me.
Mhm. And at the same time, can any one of us say that we are without sin?
Yeah.
Gets back to define sin.
Well, the classic definition of sin is to miss the mark. And it's so often the word, and you've heard me say this before, sin is not a four-letter word. It's not literally a four-letter word, and it's also not inherently this nasty, awful thing. If we can get next to it and say, yeah, I don't do the things that I ought to do, and I do a lot of stuff that I ought not to do. I'm not saying that clearly, but you get the point. And so, you know, getting next to that imperfection and then maybe saying, okay, my conduct isn't so pure. That I think that's to John's point. I think that's kind of what we're hearing so far saying. I agree with you, Fred, that they are talking past each other, and it's like, and it's these monologues, and there is some interconnection between them, but it's not a real conversation. Um,
I mean, there is a theme in Christianity that you cannot do enough. If you have two coats, give one away.
mhm,
If you have only one coat, tear it in half.
mhm.
What do you do with the half coat you have left, and you see somebody else, that regardless of what you do, it's not enough. And that's a very off-putting thing for many people, if that's their perception of Christianity.
Mhm, mhm.
Why get into a game that I can't win?
Mm.
Right. Or another way to look at it is that I don't need to win, that it's really about being in relationship with God and with my neighbor, and being generous and caring and trusting God's grace. Um, Again, easy to say, harder to do.
Yeah.
But
And it gets down to the how much is enough, what is, I mean, that's why there are people who have given away everything.
God bless.
And,
Yeah.
I recommend the movie Beckett if anybody hasn't seen it. Great movie. He finds happiness in giving away everything. But if you're, trying to support your kids and, get them through college, maybe that's a difficult aspiration.
Well, it goes back to the question that with which we wrestled last time, I think, in that, is it, how am I gotta say this clearly, and it's not clear in my head. Yes, there's the human perspective of, justice according to our terms, or, is it ever enough? Can I win this game? And then there's the, fixing our eyes on God and doing our best to live our lives according to what God has demanded of us, asks of us. It's a different, it's, the one, can I win this game? And so if I can't, why bother? That's almost the vending machine God, like, what's in it for me, right? As opposed to, all right, I am not the creator of the universe. I am small compared to the enormity of God. And so, and I'm good with that. But that's the human issue, right? Is that our ego gets involved. And I think that's what we're hearing with Job here, and Zophar is kind of poking him a little bit, that, Job keeps insisting on his innocence. And, maybe he is innocent. But, his holding assiduously to this claim of innocence is what's kind of leading him down the primrose path here, because that's when, I love Zophar saying, should your babble put others to silence? When you mock, should no one shame you? Because he is starting to kind of mock God. And Zophar saying, whoa, wouldn't go.
I think I want to get back to, sin. And you say, if I'm living in, like a Russian oligarch, am I sinning? If I'm living in a middle class, American lifestyle, and there are people in India sleeping on the pavement, am I sinning? What point do I have to spend down to where I'm without sin?
But see, that's the point, is that we can never be without sin. And that's not the end of the world. I think that's human arrogance to say we can never be without sin. That, because we're never going to get it all right. Period. Full stop. And to keep saying, but I got it right, I think that's part of that's one of the questions that's being.
Then the question is, who gets to determine what is getting it right?
Well,
is that God, or do each of us have to make that determination for ourselves?
Well, it has to be God, because you can try and try and try, and if he's still giving you bad luck, or your life isn't suddenly sunshine, then clearly you haven't found what was wrong.
Oh, I know some immensely rich people who are very, they're happy with their toys. I mean, they're shallow, but God certainly hasn't punished them. He's given them exactly what they needed for a happy life.
Well, and again, that's the prosperity gospel you're preaching there.
Well, no, they don't believe, they're not religious.
But I'm saying
it's not even religious, it's not even the prosperity gospel, because they're not thanking God for it.
But what you're saying, Fred, is that God has given them everything they want. So that's, that's prosperity.
No, I didn't say God gave them. I just said they have it.
Okay.
Well,
They have everything they want, and they don't feel no obligation to do anything for anybody else. It's all about me.
And that's sin.
They're not being punished for it.
Well,
There,
that, you know, that God doesn't reach down and strike everybody and smite
yeah, I
them
have a whole long
and do
list of
things like that.
smiteable candidates.
Don't we all? Wouldn't that be fun to say, okay, God, here's my list.
Yeah,
So none of
just
them
like
did it.
sending Santa Claus your Christmas list.
Oh dear.
Okay, I think that's a good note to.
Yeah, all right.
Elon's done.
Before we have to put out our smiting lists and find out who's on it.
Talk about naughty and nice. Before you all crack me up. Before we stop for today, is there anything else that you want to that jumps out at you that you don't want to let go of before we stop? I love that the stupid will get understanding when a wild ass is born human. It's like a footnote says here. Meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So very helpful.
English, it translates just fine.
Exactly. I don't think we need to parse that too much. Well, maybe what we can do is, we'll look back as we often do next week and just revisit and say, okay, is there anything else here that we want to talk about? And then I'm sorry, I'm just a little cracking up. And then we can move on to chapter 12. So I'm going to turn off the recording now. And then Ellie, if you want to hang out for a second, we can talk hymns, if that's helpful.